Hey, what's up, y'all? It's once again, it's Ready Chess. No, I haven't posted in a while. I've been quite busy with a couple of exams, and I've been traveling quite a lot lately. And I couldn't do it over there because the Wi-Fi wasn't even good at all. So my stream kind of lagged. But anyways, I'm back. I'm back, and I'm ready to start another game analysis based on some of the comments I've been receiving, sending for those sending games. And so over here, now we're gonna look at a different with the move e4, and black plays e6. Now, the only reason you would play into e6 is to go for the French defense, as this is called right here. And the way that the French defense usually plays out is moving to d4 and taking control of this entire center square. And black tries to counter that by playing d5 over here, to try to stop white from, to try to at least create some action within this open area. And over here, white has plenty of moves to do here. There's quite a few variations played. Like there's the advanced variation where white pushes this pawn and black tries to break open the center with c5, and white just casually supports with e3. And then black and white just develop their pieces on the board. And then another variation that's also common is to play knight c3. And then this is the follow to support the center pawn over here. Black will try to attack again with knight f6. And then white will try to force this knight back, force this knight away, which is to move pawn to e5. And then black will go to the other side of the board, who want to go to the z6 square over here and slide in this knight over here. So now to create more pressure within this queen side of the board, like ways to move. No, black is almost trying to look for the kind of this move over here, this area over here, trying to control every single one of these squares on the 4th and 5th rank over here. And then the third best one, I feel, in my opinion, is knight d2. It's not like the strongest, but it has the same approach as into guarding this pawn, having the knight come here, and then pushing the pawn to e5 over here. And so let's see what white played here. White went for e5. As I said before, it was the advanced variation right here. And then the black responds with c5. And this is how the main line is almost supposed to go over here. As we can see that these two guys know their theory. And then knight c6 follows that up. Knight c6, knight f3. Over here, I like this, trying to just develop these knights over here. And over here, black plays queen b6. I don't really know about this move. I mean, I could see why, trying to add the pawns over here, but black can just, it doesn't really work because I get also that there's a threat with this b2 attack, saying if the bishop moves. But if this is the case over here, then there's only one good move for white over here, which is to play a3. Now you might think that this is a passive move. Like, what is it trying to, what is it, the purpose of this? Well, saying in the event that black exchanges, now this bishop can't really move anywhere and can't give a check over here because this pawn is supporting this b4 square over here. And also this gives more time to possibly, who knows, push this b4 pawn and try to push these pawns up more forward. And also another move is also is also to lure this queen into taking the b2s and saying if white moves the bishop over here, like let's say if we take c4 over here, and the c4, or I don't know, like bishop e3 or so, and then the queen at take. Actually that wouldn't work because there's no way that white can defend this. Sorry. Yeah, there's no way over here that saying if black pushes, white moves. There's no defense for this because the queen can just go back, and there's no way to trap this queen. So ignore that. So this is mostly, yeah, it's just to prevent this bishop over here from creating a check and forcing white to have to defend with one of its minor pieces over here. Okay. And here, let's see what black played. Knight to g, let's say a queen b3. Now queen b3 is not the best move over here. It's more of like just trying to force a queen exchange, and it's too early on to really do this because saying if black takes the queen, then white takes, and even though you do have this open ranked file over here, these pawns over here are double pawns, and if this goes into an endgame, these pawns are not going to be safe, and white will only have to be reserved for defending these pawns, while black can just storm in over here and attack and be up a pawn over here. So I don't really like that move, but here black did not see that and instead played knight ge7, and I see why, because because he's trying to add more pressure to this d4 pawn, because on the next move this knight over here wants to go to knight f5 right here, add more pressure. And here white plays bishop e2, which is a mistake, because over here, yes, you're trying to castle, but it's not really preventing this square over here, or guarding this square over here, because now black's knight can just swing in here to knight f5, and now there's a lot of defending to do with this for this deep pawn over here. And after bishop e2, now black actually takes the pawn, which is the c takes c4, and then white takes with the queen, which is fair. I mean, it creates double pawns, but I would say that this is also a huge problem, because once white has to take, now black can just slide in this knight over here onto like knight f5 or so, and now force this bishop to defend, while also creating an opening for this bishop over here to create a check and force this knight or so to defend. And then you can add more pressure, like saying if you move this bishop, slide in this rook to the c file, and yeah, it's still equal, but it's kind of a risky situation for white. And over here, black did play knight f5 right over here. And over here, white tries to stall a little bit by playing bishop b5, which is because obviously this knight over here can't really move. Can't really move since it's being pinned. And so black has to defend itself with bishop d7. And over here, white has to play a defending move for sure, because this deep pawn is about to be lost right now. And since this knight is defended, it can launch a surprise attack right here. All right, so bishop e3 was played. That's the only good move over here. And then knight b4. And this is good because this not only threatens a fork over here on c2, but it's also threatening to win a pawn here, while also having to force this white bishop over here to exchange since this black bishop is now already facing it. And so white has to take over here with the exchange over here. And now to stop, and now think about it, you can't give up this fork over here. Otherwise, you just lose a rook for free over here. And so with that, white basically has no choice but to move the king over here, because it's the only way to prevent this from happening. And you shouldn't move over here because this knight can slide into c2 unguarded, and this rook is obviously lost. So now white played king d2, which is respectable because obviously it's the only move. And even though you lose the a pawn, at least you stop this fork from happening right here. And so let's see what happened after king d2. We have knight takes e3, exchanging. And then rook takes a2. Rook takes, has to force, and then knight takes. Now over here, now since the white is now down a pawn, now you have to get this. Now you have to get your pieces a lot active, like this rook over here, because you can't have this rook over here just staying to this side of the board forever. It has to get truly involved in this, especially when you're down a pawn. And so this rook, I would say, the goal for this rook over here is to come to an open file like c1 or a1 right here. And so here, white plays knight c3, which I think is a mistake, actually, which I see as a mistake because white can literally counter with this by sliding the bishop once and for all to b4. And now this white rook is in a pin, white king is in a pin, and saying if the white king moves to c2, now, hey, you can slide in this rook to c8. And look at this, 3 attackers against 2 defenders. And let's say if white's king moves to d3, you can attack exchange the knights, and then slide in this rook over here and force this white's rook to defend, and then you possibly have time to create a pass for this knight over here, and with these pawns over here on f, g, and h7. But over here, that did not happen actually. Black actually took the knight, and then the white responded by playing c3, and this is a big deal because look at what it does to white's pawn structure in the center over here. It has a very strong pawn structure right here. And with that, not only that, this bishop over here is also limited to only like bishop e7 or bishop a3 over here. And this rook over here is stuck over here, and it has to move at this point. And so over here, black plays e7, and now rook plays to a1, which is the best move. It stops this rook from gaining an open file and trying to do back rank checks. And I like that. And then king c6, trying to support this pawn over here. And then king d3, trying to get to the center over here. And then h6. And the h6 it's not the strongest move, but it's playable because you're mostly threatening to move this knight away to a terrible square over here. And I would say if this move were to be played, the only way for it to be effective is if you support it all the way down so that it can be promoted into a pawn later on. And that you can and for white, they can try to counter it with like a g4, stopping this move, stopping the g5, saying if it's played right here. And over here we have e4, which I see as a good move also because you're trying to force this pawn exchange and get the king into the center of the game while also having these 2 pawns, trying to possibly create a pawn push over here. And then g5 is played right here, which I see that he's going for the kingside attack over here. And so white's knight has to move to knight d2, h5. So at this point, it seems like he's focusing on his plan to push these pawns over here and create pressure on these g2 and h2 pawns over here. And then rook f1 over here and rook h7. Now, I don't know if rook h7 is a good move. I would have preferred rook f8 because look at what this does to black's rook. Look at how limited it is over here. Like, it's being forced to defend this pawn over here sideways instead of backwards. And over here is saying if the knight over here gets to a square like g5 or knight e5, then this pawn is going to be hard to defend. So I don't really know about that move. And so over here, there's c4, once again trying to get these pawns to be the center of the game over here by forcing the exchange. And also, I think I see another threat over here because saying if black wastes a move over here, no, like let me just waste a move like h4. Don't we also have pawn takes, and rook takes, and then black moves to, or sorry, not there. Black moves to c7 to guard this, and then white takes a pawn, and that kind of seems like another possibility over here. But the only problem with this is that there's this bishop in the way, and so with that, this idea can't really happen over here. And over here, wait a second. Bishop moves to b4. Oh, that there is a blunder. And that basically ties back to what I just said about that tactic I showed you all. Because look, if pawn takes and exchanges, then this rook can just slide in here. And this king, it can go to c5 or b5. And it's forced to defend this pawn, so it has to move to c7, and look at this. White gets its pawn, and all of a sudden, it's not really equal. White has the advantage because look at these 2 pawns that are able to push forward. And then over here, this black rook is in a tight spot and has to waste a move to try to defend this h-file over here. And so, yeah, this is basically almost a game changer right here. And so after b4, white takes with the d pawn, but it doesn't really matter at this point. Pawn takes, rook to f6, and the king c7, and then e takes d5. And so now this is really, and so now with this, now white all of a sudden is back in this game. So let's see what happened. And black exchanges. I'm assuming that he saw that the knight was going to go to e4, and this makes the white's process more easier because it doesn't have to deal with that pesky little bishop over there. So king d2, and so king d2 is done, and then g4, and so once again trying to go back to the plan of pushing over here, and then king e3. At this point, you're just trying to get these 2 pawns out. And then h4, and then h4 is over here. Then king f4, trying to get this pawn over here. And then h3 over here. And then white responds with g3, stopping this promotion and putting pressure on the g4 pawn over here. And now the rook has to defend over here with rook g7 at this point. Then king f5. Now I see that white has another threat of trying to get this f pawn over here. And then b5, which is kind of almost like a desperate hope that white is unable to catch up to this b1 square. but white anticipates this and moves to king e4, and then black moves to b6. But this over here does not work because this white king can just slide in over here to king d3 as played, and then try to get this b5 square over here. And so king b7, king c3, and king, and never mind, that's a resignation. And so yeah, black resigned basically after this. So yeah, in total, this was a great comeback by white over here. They were down a pawn, but they got some help based on one main blunder that changed the game, which was that bishop move over here, not failing to anticipate the threat I showed with anticipating to fail this threat over here. Trying to force this king off its defenders, and force the king from trying to force these pawns from its defender, and taking advantage of it right here. And so this was a good, and so that was also a missed opportunity. But another key missed opportunity was this knight exchange over here. Knight takes a c3 because this allows this isolated pawn over here to now become connected to these three pawns over here in the center. So now white doesn't have to deal with a poor pawn structure. And this white rook can basically slide into b1 as it has this file to attack these double pawns over here to try to create an equal game. Or that could have possibly been stopped by bishop b4 at least, trying to force white to stall and have to defend this knight over here. And as for white, how white got into this position is also key to know because of this passive move, because over here of this bishop move over here. It's a passive move that allows black the opportunity to go to knight f5 eventually and add pressure to this pawn. And with this, with this over here, after that, the pawn takes. Well, actually, apart from this bishop move, this was kind of the main outlier by having to exchange the pawns while also allowing this knight to come in here and allow this bishop to possibly slide to b4 over here, while this bishop over here is forced to defend this d pawn. And this is a nice check over here. And so, yeah, so over here, this is, over here, the entire summary of this game in total is mostly just maybe an anticipation over here was kind of a little issue for both of them, as in failing to anticipate certain threats over here. Like this knight move over here, the bishop move later in the game. Oh, sorry. This failing to anticipate possibly this threat over here, in the sense that because the bishop moved over here. And also another key thing to note is that even though that in total being down a pawn or so, or any piece in chess is kind of a scary thing, because now you're thinking, oh, black will easily defend everything, and you know it'll be hard to make a comeback. But you actually have to take the time to actually find the opportunities, find the possible openings that can at least give you a chance at winning. Because there are plenty of players who choose to resign after maybe being down a pawn or so. I mean, it would make sense in an endgame if it's really bad. In the case where it's to promote, that's understandable. But in the middle of a game, you have to play it out. You can't really just resign immediately, because that's mostly a loser's mentality, and that's not really like the genius and joy of chess. And so yeah, that's basically it over here. And That was the game I showed. Props to those two. They played really hard, and good luck to them moving forward. But this is it from Ready Chess. I'll once again post another video once I get fresh new comments. And if you want to keep up with all these videos and learning about various openings, tactics, analyzing mistakes that you could possibly make, drop a like or subscribe to the channel, and have a good day.